The most common speaking opportunity that you'll encounter in an academic setting and even in a business setting is often the chance to speak to inform, to create an informative speech to enhance your audience's knowledge without persuading them. To do this, we need to examine the types of speeches, the guidelines for the speeches, how we learn, because how we learn will help you create the type of speech that you're presenting, and how not to be persuasive, because there is a fine line between an informative speech and a persuasive speech. This is a common type of speech that you will encounter when you seek to inform people. It can be about objects. Artificial intelligence, for instance, is a type of object that you might explore and talk to people about, as well as other things that you might have that is very important to you, such as if you want to inform someone about your favorite car, or perhaps your favorite type of ice cream. Now, these remain informative as long as we are analyzing the overall item and we put in an organizational process where we're not comparing and contrasting it to something else, but whether informing about it. Such as you can see in the slide here, we're talking about the development of artificial intelligence and how the word was originated and then how it's been applied to society over the past 60 years. This is a good way and often a common type of informative speech that you will present. This can be an academic setting where you're informing about the Industrial Revolution or about airplanes or about any number of things where we're just really seeking to inform people and build their knowledge. This is another favorite type, about a process, about taking something and creating it into something else. Speeches along this line can absolutely include hobbies that you enjoy, baking, painting, carving, any number of things that involve a process. This can also be very instructional if you're going to inform someone about how to change a car tire, change their oil. Perhaps you're going to tell them how to winterize their house. There are a number of cases where you're going to be required to give a structured speech that presents about how to accomplish something. These are a very common speech that I'm sure you've given impromptu at times, even when it's showing someone in your family about how to perhaps reprogram their TV remote or how to make a cake. There are a number of these. This is a favorite one that I really enjoy because it gives you a chance to share your perspective on the world, not change people's views about it, but to enlighten them. And that is speeches about events, because there are many events that come up that people need to know about, perhaps birthdays at your house, how that occurs, how your family celebrates holidays, or, such as in this case, a religious event that you participate in. Events are very common and are used often as a subject for the informative speech. So far, the speeches we've covered have been pretty much where you don't look at your audience's latitude of acceptance. For the most part, if you're instructing someone on a process, if you're instructing them on a history, or you're instructing them on an object, very rarely are you going to have people really have pushback against that. And so your audience analysis in those cases, you're going to focus on, okay, what do they know? How can I enhance it? And you're not overly worried about that latitude of acceptance. But when you get to concepts, when you start talking and educating people on concepts, you suddenly have to really look at that audience analysis and find out what their latitude of acceptance is, so that way you can determine, okay, how will I connect to my audience? What do I need to do so they just don't shut me off because I'm going to talk about a concept like equality and diversity, marriage equality, age equality, religion, gender. You could take a look back and you could start at the late 19th century all the way up to modern history and want to talk about the changes in women's voting rights. And you can trace that without being persuasive. You can make an informative speech about it. But you have to realize you have to know your audience at this point and really do dive down into their latitude of acceptance if they're going to reject it just because of the title of it. And this will make these speeches more difficult, but they are very important. So in your evaluating, okay, what type of speech do I do? Concepts is absolutely on the table and something you could consider doing. These, though, you really have to know your audience and you have to make sure that you're not being persuasive, because it is easy to move into persuasion when you're talking about concepts like global warming or gender relation and etc. Important concepts within our society that we have a difficult time talking about. If you can craft a good informative speech on this, you're well on your way to connecting with your audience. There are some guidelines for when you're creating any of these speeches. Oftentimes we speak about things we know, things we cherish, our hobbies, things we love. However, just because I'm a complete nerd and I completely understand when you're talking about the alignment of the dilithium crystals in the warp chamber, for many audience members are going to be like, what is this guy talking about? He's crazy. Yeah, I am a little bit crazy, but in all honesty, I'm a Star Trek fan, so I understand that. But your audience may not. So when you're sharing something you're passionate about, something you know the base knowledge of, don't overestimate what your audience knows. Realize your audience analysis will need to pinpoint, okay, what terms will my audience not know that I need to explain? How can I reword something so that my audience's base knowledge can be brought up so I can connect with them? You have to start looking at that so you can relate the subject directly to your audience. This keeps your audience engaged. This keeps them listening. This gets the image you have up here into their minds. And that is what you're looking to do. Technical terms especially can be really difficult when you're looking at people that are engaged in some part of technology, auto mechanics, computers, artificial intelligence. All of these have very technical terms. You may need to understand how to teach your audience as you're informing them on your overall topic. Avoid abstractions. You want to make things clear and concrete for your audience. So don't make it kind of a Picasso for them. Instead, what you really want to do is make it so that way they understand what you're explaining. Personalize your ideas. This is where storytelling comes in. This is why we start the semester with storytelling. Because if you can personalize some aspect of it, especially when you begin talking about your credibility, this is going to be very important. Because if you just go out and tell your audience about, oh, here, let me tell you about how to change your oil. You don't know, I may have never changed oil in a car in my life. It's just something I read. On the other hand, if I say, hey, I grew up in a family and we spent so much time around cars, we loved cars, I've loved cars my entire life, and I have changed oil in 50 different types of cars and I've done it over 100 times. Boom. You've now made the topic personal to your experiences. You've shared somewhat of a story and your audience now believes you. You have that ethos, you have that credibility. Be creative in informative speeches. Oftentimes students have a textbook. They have information in front of them that, okay, yeah, I can read it. I can read your slides. I can read your PowerPoint. I can read your handout. Be creative in how you present it. Make it so that it comes to life for them, so that you connect with your audience, keep them learning. Speaking of learning, this is hugely important when you're talking about informative speeches. This is why, hey, PowerPoint lives. This is the reason that professors assign you the task of, oh, I want you to present on this chapter. It's because they're trying to increase your learning. About 5% of our learning is coming from lecture. That's not a whole lot of information sinking in. So just talking at my class or talking at a student, that doesn't connect. But if I pair that lecture with a book, okay, it's gone up. Suddenly we're at 10%. We doubled that. If I double it again, I put in audio visual. I put in a PowerPoint, you're reading a book, I'm lecturing on it, we have a video. Wow, suddenly we've doubled it again and we're at 20%. Demonstration. This is especially important in instruction because if you have something you can demonstrate, don't tell me how to make cookies, show me how to make cookies. Don't tell me how to change a tire, show me how to change the tire. We are getting up into 30%. Discussions. This is one area that is very helpful that has to be done right if you really want to connect with your audience. You can't lecture at your audience and call it a discussion. You can't monologue. What you actually have to do is present the information, do the lecture, do the reading, do the audiovisual, do the demonstration, and then interact with your audience. Let them feel free to ask questions. Like they said, there's no stupid question. Absolutely, you have to take that philosophy because you want to hear what they're saying. Another important key is in discussion, don't say an audience member is wrong. Don't say no. Instead say, explain to me why that's your view and let me know, so that way you're not shutting off your audience, not closing them down. You're allowing them to state their perspective, and then you can take the parts that are important out of it and say, okay, yeah, I can see where you're coming from now. Now, what about, and you can engage in a discussion. That gets you up to 50%. Practice doing. This is where I miss the classroom at times and why at times online can be difficult because it's hard to practice doing. But in public speaking, guess what? 4 times this semester, you get the opportunity to practice. Not only my lecturing, not only your reading, not only are we doing audiovisual, not only are we doing some type of demonstration, not only do we have discussions going on the discussion boards after we review the material, now you're going to stand up and you're going to present. You're going to present 4 times, and that's practice doing. Now we're at 75%. If you can get your audience to do the same thing, where, okay, I'm going to show you how to do origami, and you make something, and then you discuss it, and then you let them show you what they learned, boom, you have gotten up to 75%. And that final top one, if you can, is for them to teach others. Now, this can actually be done in some settings. In the settings that we're looking at now, it's not really applicable because we're doing this online and we're also doing it in classrooms to teach others. Though if you have a period of time, you might break up what you're instructing and let groups then go ahead and practice it, show that they know how to do it, and then show the other group how to do it. So this way they get the opportunity to learn it, and then they can demonstrate it to the next group, etc. In so doing, you're now up to 90%. You're truly being informative. Your audience is going to leave there, and what's really nice is they're going to retain 90% at that point of what you taught them. This is the tough one, not to be persuasive. Why is this tough? Because it's a very thin line. Going from informative to persuasive. You might talk about, okay, let me show you how to make this awesome meal. And so you demonstrate it, but at some point you're going to be like, well, now that you've known this, stop doing the other thing. You know, don't eat this anymore. Change your diet. Change how you live. Be healthier. Guess what? You just took that informative and made it persuasive. Because with the informative speech, we want to instruct, explain, and describe. In a persuasive speech, we are truly looking at changing beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. And those can really pass off easily between each other. Gives the audience something. In all your speeches, you're truly wanting to bless the audience. You want to give them something. Especially in an informative, that's where your main goal is. Now, in a persuasive speech, not only do you want to give them something, but you want to get something from them. In a persuasive speech, you want your audience to change a belief, change a behavior, and you want them to commit to it. And that is a persuasive speech. So you're definitely, in both cases, you give your audience something. But in a persuasive, you're trying to get something from them. In one, you tell them something. In the other, you sell them something. And this, of course, seems like a very simple thing, but the next part is what throws the entire thing to being difficult. Information can be persuasive. If I show you how to paint, for instance, I give you an informative on that, well, I might just now have persuaded you to change your hobby without really trying to change your ideas or your belief. You might decide, oh, I'm going to stop doing the other things. I'm going to take up painting. I'm going to become an artist. Well, in your informative speech, it became persuasive, not intentionally, and you won't be graded on that basis. I'm not going to look and say, oh, well, I could be, you know. If you do a good informative speech, it can actually lead to changes unintentionally. Now, in a persuasive speech, you have to use information. It has to be informative. That's actually why in the class, we start out with the introduction speech, which features stories. Then we go to informative. And the informative, we are trying to truly bless our audience, give them information. But we're going to use stories also in our informative. And we can use stories then again in our persuasive. And not only along the way did we have the storytelling included in 3, in the second speech, it picks up the informative part, and your persuasive speech can include stories, and it's definitely going to be informative in some way because that information is what makes it persuasive. So you can see how they all kind of add and build as you're going through the semester. This is what we talked about. Types of speeches, some of our guidelines, how we learn, and not being persuasive. When you go out there, make sure that your informative speech, you want to bless your audience, you don't want to impress them. You want your audience to absolutely retain the information you give them, because your informative speech needs to be something that people can reflect back upon and have felt they gained some knowledge and some information. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me. Email through Messenger on D2L. I'll see you soon.